When Diego Morales and his crew spotted the lone woman hanging laundry outside the isolated ranch house near the Texas-Mexico border, they saw nothing more than an easy target for their human trafficking operation. The 34-year-old cartel lieutenant had built his reputation on identifying vulnerable victims who wouldn't be missed quickly, and Sarah Mitchell seemed perfect for their purposes. What Diego couldn't have known was that the quiet rancher's wife hanging bedsheets in the desert wind was Master Sergeant Sarah "Ghost" Mitchell, a decorated Green Beret sniper whose kill count in Afghanistan had earned her legendary status among Special Operations Forces. But those days were behind her now, carefully buried beneath the peaceful life she'd built with her husband, Tom, on their cattle ranch 50 miles from the nearest town. The morning sun cast long shadows across the high desert ranch as Sarah Mitchell stepped onto the back porch, carrying a basket of freshly washed clothes. At 32, she moved with the unconscious precision of someone whose muscle memory had been forged in combat zones. Though her current concerns centered around managing 200 head of cattle and maintaining the solar panels that powered their remote homestead, her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her weathered jeans and flannel shirt gave no hint of the tactical expertise that lay dormant beneath her civilian appearance. Tom Mitchell had left before dawn to check the water pumps in the south pasture, a routine maintenance trip that would keep him away until late afternoon. The isolation that made their ranch perfect for raising cattle also made it invisible to law enforcement patrols and emergency services. Sarah had grown comfortable with the solitude, finding peace in the vast emptiness that surrounded their property after years of hypervigilance in hostile territory. As she hung Tom's work shirts on the clothesline, Sarah's trained eyes automatically scanned the horizon out of habit rather than concern. The desert landscape stretched endlessly toward the Mexican border 15 miles south, broken only by mesquite bushes and the occasional coyote trail. Nothing moved except the wind-driven grass and a red-tailed hawk circling high overhead. The tranquility represented everything she'd fought to protect during her military service, and everything she'd hoped to find when she finally came home. Diego Morales watched through binoculars from a ridge 2 miles away, studying the ranch house with the calculating gaze of a predator evaluating prey. At 34, Diego had spent 12 years working his way up through the ranks of the Gulf Cartel, specializing in human trafficking operations that supplied labor and entertainment to criminal networks throughout Mexico and Central America. His success came from identifying isolated targets who could disappear without immediate investigation. "Looks like she's alone," Diego said to his second-in-command, Carlos Vega, a scarred veteran of countless border operations. "Husband's truck is gone. No workers visible. Perfect setup for a quick grab." Carlos studied the property through his own binoculars, noting the remote location and lack of security measures. "How do we know she won't be missed right away?" "Nearest neighbor is 20 miles east," Diego replied with confidence. "These rancher types go days without contact. We'll have her across the border and processed before anyone knows she's missing." The team consisted of 6 experienced operators who'd conducted dozens of similar kidnappings along the border region. Their white panel van bore stolen Texas plates and enough legitimate ranch supplies to pass casual inspection. Diego's reputation within the cartel hierarchy depended on maintaining high success rates with minimal complications, and this operation appeared routine enough to execute without special precautions. Miguel Santos, the team's youngest member at 19, had joined the cartel 6 months earlier to escape poverty in his hometown of Matamoros. His role was typically limited to lookout duties, but Diego was training him in operational planning as potential investment in the organization's future leadership. "Miguel, what do you observe about the target location?" Diego asked, testing the young man's tactical awareness. Miguel studied the ranch house carefully before responding. "Single-story construction, probably 3 bedrooms, Attached garage, solar panel array suggests off-grid power system. Woman appears to be in her 30s. Physically fit. No visible weapons or security devices. Good observations, Diego acknowledged. What else? Property is isolated enough that we won't face immediate interference. But that also means no witnesses to identify our vehicle or methods, Miguel continued. Growing more confident in his analysis, Diego nodded approvingly. The kid showed promise for strategic thinking, though he still lacked the experience to recognize potential complications that weren't immediately obvious. Diego had learned through hard experience that the most dangerous operations were often the ones that appeared simplest. Sarah finished hanging the laundry and walked back toward the house. Her movements efficient and purposeful. Inside, she made coffee and settled at the kitchen table with ranch management paperwork that required attention before Tom returned. The mundane details of cattle vaccination schedules and feed supply invoices represented a dramatic change from mission planning documents and target acquisition reports. But she'd grown, too. Appreciate the predictable nature of civilian responsibilities. The satellite phone on the kitchen counter remained silent, as it had for the past 3 weeks. Sarah's former teammates occasionally checked in through encrypted channels, sharing updates about mutual friends and ongoing operations in various theaters. But those connections felt increasingly distant as she settled deeper into ranch life and found satisfaction in work that built rather than destroyed. Asterisk through the kitchen window. Sarah could see the cattle gathered near the main water tank, their presence a comforting reminder of the productive nature of her current life. Tom had taught her to read their behavior patterns, understanding that contented livestock indicated a healthy operation. The skills weren't so different from reading terrain and population dynamics in combat zones, though the stakes were considerably lower and the outcomes infinitely more positive. Diego's team moved into position using a carefully planned approach that exploited natural terrain features to remain invisible from the ranch house. Their vehicles were positioned to block potential escape routes while maintaining quick access to the main highway. The operation timeline called for a 10-minute window to secure the target and withdraw before any unexpected complications could develop. Asterisk Carlos. You and Rosa circle behind the house to cut off rear exits, Diego instructed through radio headsets. Miguel and Javier approach from the east side. Fernando stays with the vehicles for immediate extraction. The team moved with practiced coordination, their experience evident in the smooth deployment across challenging terrain. Diego had selected operators based on their proven reliability in high-stress situations. Understanding that kidnapping operations required both physical capability and psychological control, Rosa Martinez, the team's only female member, had joined the cartel after her family was murdered by a rival organization. Her motivation was revenge rather than money, making her both incredibly dangerous and completely reliable. At 28, she'd participated in over 30 successful operations and had never shown hesitation when violence became necessary. Target is still inside the main structure, Rosa reported as she reached her assigned position. No signs of awareness or defensive preparation. Diego felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that accompanied the final moments before an operation launched. Years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts about timing and tactical conditions. Everything about this situation felt routine and manageable, exactly the kind of operation that built organizational reputation and personal wealth. Sarah poured her second cup of coffee and walked to the front window to check on the cattle. Routine that had become automatic over the past 18 months. Her trained eyes swept the landscape with the systematic precision that had kept her alive through multiple combat deployments, though she no longer expected to identify threats in the familiar terrain surrounding her home. The slight glint of metal near the eastern ridge caught her attention for just a moment before her civilian mindset dismissed it as probably sunlight reflecting off a beer can or a piece of ranch debris. but something in her subconscious triggered the alertness protocols that had been drilled into her through years of special operations training. Sarah set down her coffee cup and moved to the gun safe in the bedroom, her hands automatically working. The combination that unlocked her personal arsenal. Inside were the weapons she'd hoped never to need again. A customized M24 sniper rifle, a Sig Sauer P320 pistol, and enough ammunition to fight a small war. Below the weapons lay her old tactical gear, still maintained in perfect condition out of ingrained habit. The rationale part of her mind insisted that she was overreacting to nothing more than rancher paranoia and muscle memory from a previous life, but 15 years of survival in hostile environments had taught her to trust instinctive warnings, even when logic suggested otherwise. Through the bedroom window, Sarah caught another glimpse of movement near the barn that didn't match normal ranch activity. Her heart rate increased as combat training overrode civilian assumptions, flooding her system with a hyper-awareness that had made her one of the most effective snipers in special operations history. Diego checked his watch and gave the final signal to begin the assault. 6 armed figures moved simultaneously toward the ranch house, their approach coordinated to overwhelm any resistance before the target could react or call for help. The operation had reached the point of no return, setting in motion events that would test assumptions on both sides about capability, preparation, and the true nature of their opposition. Sarah heard the first footstep on her front porch and felt the familiar calm that had always preceded her most challenging missions. The peaceful rancher's wife, who'd been hanging laundry 20 minutes earlier, began disappearing as Master Sergeant Sarah Mitchell prepared to remind the world why they called her Ghost. But before we continue with what happens next, tell us where you're listening from, and if this story has your attention, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow we have something special planned for you. The front door exploded inward as Carlos Vega kicked it off its hinges, expecting to find a terrified ranch wife cowering in her kitchen. Instead, he found himself staring down the barrel of a Sig Sauer P320 held in the steady hands of someone who clearly knew how to use it. Sarah had positioned herself behind the kitchen island, using the granite surface as cover while maintaining clear sight lines to both entrances. "Wrong house," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying none of the fear Diego's team expected to hear. The transformation was complete now. The peaceful rancher's wife had vanished, replaced by a combat veteran whose muscle memory had kicked into overdrive. Carlos hesitated for a crucial half-second, confused by the unexpected resistance. In that moment of uncertainty, Sarah put 2 rounds center mass into his chest, dropping him instantly. The suppressed gunshots made barely more noise than a pneumatic nail gun, giving her tactical advantage over the remaining attackers who hadn't yet realized their operation had gone sideways. "Carlos is down." Rosa's voice crackled through the radio as she heard the muffled impacts from her position near the back door. "Target is armed and dangerous. Repeat, target is engaged." Diego felt his confidence evaporate as he processed Rosa's report. This wasn't supposed to happen. Ranch wives didn't carry military-grade weapons or demonstrate combat shooting skills. Something was very wrong with their intelligence about this target. "Miguel Javier, establish perimeter containment," Diego ordered, his tactical training overriding his confusion. "Rosa, breach the rear entrance. We overwhelm her with multiple entry points." Sarah heard the radio chatter through Carlos's earpiece and immediately understood their coordination strategy. 6 attackers total, 1 down, 5 remaining with at least limited tactical training. She moved through her house with the fluid precision of someone who'd cleared countless hostile structures, using furniture and doorways to maintain cover while advancing toward better defensive positions. The ranch house had been unconsciously arranged according to principles Sarah had learned in urban warfare training: clear sightlines, multiple escape routes, and strategic positioning of heavy furniture that could stop small arms fire. What had seemed like normal home decoration was actually a defensive layout designed by someone who understood how buildings became battlefields. Rosa attempted to breach the back door and immediately took a round through the shoulder that spun her against the doorframe. Sarah's shot placement was surgical, disabling without immediately killing, preserving ammunition while reducing enemy capability. Rosa dropped her weapon and stumbled backward, clutching her wounded arm and cursing in rapid Spanish. "Rosas hit," Miguel reported, his young voice tight with stress. "This woman knows what she's doing. This isn't some random ranch wife." Diego's mind raced as he tried to process the rapidly deteriorating situation. Professional marksmanship, tactical positioning, coordinated defensive actions. These weren't skills that civilian women typically possessed. Either they'd stumbled into an elaborate trap, or their intelligence about the target had been catastrophically wrong. "Who the hell is this woman?" Diego muttered, studying the ranch house through his binoculars and noting defensive improvements he'd missed during initial reconnaissance. Sarah retrieved Carlos's radio and weapon, adding his ammunition to her tactical load while monitoring enemy communications. The radio chatter revealed confusion and growing fear among the remaining attackers, exactly the psychological advantage she needed to control the engagement. "Listen carefully," Sarah spoke into the radio with the calm authority of someone accustomed to battlefield command. "You've made a serious mistake. Leave now and you might survive this. Stay, and I'll kill every one of you." The transmission sent a chill through Diego's team. The woman's voice carried no emotion, no fear. Just the matter-of-fact certainty of someone who delivered on similar promises before. Miguel looked questioningly at Diego, clearly wanting permission to retreat from what had become a nightmare scenario. "She's bluffing," Diego said, though his voice lacked conviction. "One woman can't hold off our entire team." Javier Moreno, a 10-year cartel veteran, positioned himself near the eastern window and caught a glimpse of Sarah moving through the house interior. What he saw made his blood run cold. Tactical gear, professional weapon handling, and movement patterns that screamed military training. "Diego, we need to abort," Javier said urgently. "This woman is special forces or something close to it. We're not equipped for this kind of fight." Sarah had reached the gun safe and quickly donned her tactical vest and load-bearing equipment. The familiar weight of combat gear felt strange after months of civilian clothing, but her body remembered every strap and pocket. She slung the M24 sniper rifle across her back and checked her ammunition count, enough for a sustained engagement if necessary. Through her scope, Sarah studied the remaining attackers and immediately recognized their tactical limitations. Criminals with basic weapons training, dangerous but predictable. Nothing like the professional insurgents she'd faced in Afghanistan, but deadly enough to require careful elimination. Diego made the fatal decision to escalate rather than retreat. "Fernando, bring the van closer. We'll use explosive breaching to overwhelm her defenses." The radio transmission gave Sarah crucial intelligence about their intentions and resources. Explosive breaching meant they had military-grade equipment, but also suggested desperation rather than tactical superiority. She moved to the ranch house's second-story window, gaining elevation advantage for precision shooting. Miguel approached the front of the house carrying a breaching charge, his inexperience evident in his exposed movement across open ground. Sarah's rifle spoke once, and Miguel collapsed with a round through his leg that shattered his femur. The young man's screams echoed across the desert as he realized he'd been deliberately wounded rather than killed. "Mercy shot," Sarah announced through the radio. "He'll live if you get him medical attention quickly. The next one won't be so lucky." Diego stared at Miguel, writhing in the dirt, and felt something he'd rarely experienced in 12 years of cartel operations: genuine fear. This woman wasn't just defending herself. She was systematically dismantling his team with surgical precision that spoke to extensive combat experience. Javier made the smart decision and started moving toward the vehicles, unwilling to die for an operation that had clearly gone beyond salvaging. "I'm out, Diego. This is suicide." "Coward," Diego snarled. But he was beginning to understand that Javier's assessment might be correct. Sarah's next shot took out one of the van's tires, eliminating their primary escape vehicle and forcing the remaining attackers to face the reality of their situation. She could have disabled all their vehicles, but chose to leave them an exit route, understanding that cornered enemies fought more desperately than those with escape options. Fernando, the driver, panicked and started the damaged van anyway, limping away from the ranch house at reduced speed. Diego found himself abandoned with only Rosa, who was growing weak from blood loss, and Miguel, who needed immediate medical attention. Last chance, Sarah called out from her elevated position. "Take your wounded and leave. There's a hospital in Del Rio that can save them both." Diego's pride warred with his survival instincts as he faced the humiliating reality of retreat. His reputation within the cartel would suffer tremendously, but his life expectancy would improve dramatically. The woman in the ranch house had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded anything in his experience. "We're leaving," Diego announced, holstering his weapon and moving toward Rosa's position. "Help me get them to the backup vehicle." Sarah watched through her scope as Diego and the surviving team members loaded their wounded and retreated toward a second vehicle hidden behind the ridge. She maintained overwatch until they disappeared, then immediately began tactical cleanup procedures that would eliminate evidence of the engagement. Tom Mitchell returned home 3 hours later to find his wife calmly repairing the front door with tools from his workshop. The tactical gear had disappeared, replaced by her normal ranch clothes. And the only sign of trouble was Carlos's body, which Sarah had already prepared for disposal. "Rough day?" Tom asked with the dry humor of someone who'd married a former special operations soldier. "Cartel recruitment team," Sarah replied matter-of-factly. "They won't be back." Tom nodded and kissed his wife's forehead, understanding that her past had occasionally intersected with their present, but grateful that her skills had protected them both. "Need help with cleanup?" "Already handled," Sarah said, gesturing toward the wrapped body. "Desert's good for making problems disappear." 6 months later, Diego Morales sat in a Matamoros bar, drinking tequila and telling anyone who'd listen about the ranch wife, who'd destroyed his entire operation single-handedly. Most people assumed the story was alcohol-fueled fiction, but word eventually reached cartel leadership that certain properties near the Texas border were best left alone. Sarah never learned Diego's name or what happened to his organization, but she noticed that the isolated incidents of border crime in their area decreased significantly after that day. Tom installed additional security measures around the ranch, though both of them understood that Sarah herself remained their most effective defensive system. The high desert ranch returned to its peaceful routine of cattle management and solar panel maintenance, with laundry hanging quietly in the desert wind. But Sarah kept her tactical gear clean and ready, understanding that the skills that had kept her alive in Afghanistan might occasionally be needed to protect the life she'd built in Texas. Sometimes the most dangerous mistake you can make is assuming that peaceful people are helpless people. And sometimes the quiet rancher's wife hanging laundry in her backyard is actually a decorated Green Beret sniper who's earned the right to live in peace by proving she can destroy anyone foolish enough to threaten it.
Hit subscribe and keep watching. More stories waiting for you. Tap the video on screen. Just click and enjoy.